Hey, beer appreciators! สวัสดีครับ Welcome to Beer Time Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. For today's session, we will have some good burps about the fascinating world of hop breeding. Now, if you are into beer, then I assume that you are familiar, quite familiar with, these two rockstar hops, Citra and Mosaic. Do you know that as of today, Citra is close to 20 years old, and for Mosaic, it is approaching 15 since they were first commercialized. Have you ever wondered, how these two hops and many more, were created? In addition, on average, nowadays a new hop variety is entering the market, every 2 to 4 years, from each hop company. And it looks like, from brewers and consumers' perspective, it is always exciting to hear and learn about this new hop variety and, see how the qualities will translate into the beer in our glass. However, one thing that seems to not be widely talked about is what is happening behind the curtain to create these exciting new hop cultivars. The questions like why bother breeding a new hop variety at all, and how much work is put into the breeding process, as well as how long does it take to breed a new variety, and where does the name of the new hop variety come from, are the ones that fuel today's session. And to find out about them, I believe that there is no better ways than talking to someone who's in the front line of hop breeding world, and that happens to be our guest speaker, who was born and raised in a hop growing family where his playground was in the hop field. So let me introduce him to all of us. During his teenage life, he met the great man named Chuck Zimmerman, who was the original hop breeding program director for Yakima Chief Ranches since the late 1980s. With his interest in hops, Chuck took him under his wing, and then he began working alongside Chuck, absorbing experiences in the world of hop breeding. In 2001, after receiving a Master of Science in Plant Breeding and Genetics, he began running the hop breeding program for Yakima Chief Ranches called Selected Botanical Group. A year later, in 2002, the group entered a joint venture with John I. Haas, create the hop breeding company with the focus of developing innovative hop varieties that meet the evolving needs of the brewing industry. And there, he became one of the company's leading breeders. The breeding was very fruitful, leading to the introduction of hops like Citra, Mosaic, Iguana, Sabro, you name it, and the most recent one, Crush, to the brewing world. Now, fast forward to the present day, he's the CEO and head hop breeder for Yakima Chief Ranches, as well as a fourth generation hop farmer of the Perrault farm in Washington State, USA. So please welcome our guest speaker, Jason Perrault.
Hello,
Hello,
now.
Jason. Hey,
Thank you
how's it
for
going?
having me. Oh, it's going
Yeah,
good. How
sure.
are you?
I'm very good. My pleasure. It's always, it's good to have you on the platform. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
I got it. So how are things over there? You in Washington right now, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's right now it's a busy time for us. I would say it's probably on the farming side of things, or just in hops in general. You could argue this is our busiest time. Even though
Um,
harvest kind of is gets all the glory. Because
Around the
it
clock.
is it's
Yeah.
intense. It's 24/7. Um, right now, those really where we set the stage for the crop, and we're working not quite as long hours, but at the we're all over the place. We got a million different things going on, different fields. Every variety has different requirements, and springtime work, particularly the pruning and training, really sets the stage for yield and quality later. So important time.
Got you. So at this stage, it is at the beginning of the growing season, right? Like
That's right.
beginning of April, May.
Yep.
And um, this is probably off the topic, but I just curious, like what are the certain conditions that you are looking for or hope for that every year will kind of align with what you need?
Well, it's agriculture, right? So we're really dependent on Mother Nature, and so the
Yeah.
weather really is the the driving force right now in terms of what we would consider success, or what would set us up for success for a good harvest. And so we can, while we're very good at predicting the weather that's already happened, we're not very good at predicting what hasn't happened yet. And so
right.
And it's very complex. There's a very complex interaction between plant growth and the weather, and whether it be temperature in the evenings, soil moisture, all these things, wind, they all play a factor in this. And then we have to time everything just right. And so I think, it's tough to say, here's the conditions we want, but, if we're in a perfect season, it's a good balance of moisture in the soil prior to us, starting up the irrigation systems. It's a good, proper number of growing degree days or heat units, but not too much. We don't want too hot of weather. And then I would love it if the wind decided to not blow from about, March 15th to June 1st. It would be great. But, wind plays a role in that as well, because you're talking about a young plant that's got to climb up the string. We got to get the strings in the ground. And so that plays a role. So really it boils down to weather. And so, we always joke that farmers are going to complain about the weather no matter what. That's kind of what we do. And so, we'll never hit perfect for sure.
That's good complaint, by the way. But yeah, so I mean, thanks for giving this a little bit of the groundwork of the growing season, because like what you mentioned, most of the time the highlight for hops is generally at the tail's end, the harvest 24/7. But this is one of the key. I mean, the whole growing is key too, but just recognition for each stage is also important, and see how people kind of interact with each activities along the way. I think that's kind of a cool side.
Yeah, I think a lot of what people don't realize is that the hop plant itself, it's pretty complex. When you look at that plant that's growing, and it can grow, let's say on ideal conditions, it'll grow a foot in a day. I mean, that's really rapid growth. And so if you were to dissect that growing tip of that plant, you would have several nodes already predetermined. So really, when you look at a plant that's 6 to 8 feet tall, it's already has a lot of the future already predetermined, so to speak. And so, the actions we take now are absolutely critical to yield, quality, and other factors at harvest time. And so, even though you may not, it's not tangible, we don't see it, it's certainly exceptionally important that we get things right now, at least as right as possible. So.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, so Jason, let's do some pre-game warm-up talk before we kick off the session for today. I understand that you are a part of a hop growing family, but I wonder like what made you become interested in the breeding part, like specifically, like how did it all start?
So you're right. I grew up on a hop farm, and the way you described it at the beginning was about right. That the hop yards were kind of our playground growing up. That was that was our life. And so I've always hops in general have always been my interest. And I've known from a very young age that I wanted to be a farmer. And whether it was hops or whatever it was, I there's something that just resonates with me in terms of finding purpose when it comes to making a living off the land. It sounds maybe overly romantic or whatever, but there's a lot of truth to that. Especially when you grow up with it, there's something very there's a connection there that's important, that becomes important to you. And so it's always resonated with me. It's always something I wanted to do. And of course, being grown up on a hop farm, hops were by default the chosen crop. But I do love the plant. It's a fascinating plant. There's a lot to it that it's very complex. When you look at from the standpoint of everything it does in beer, and what drives that, you're talking, potentially thousands of compounds that are driving flavor and aroma, and how every factor that can influence that, particularly, from the environmental standpoint, and also though from the genetic standpoint. So I was fortunate enough to actually be coming into adulthood during a very difficult time in the hop industry. And so,
Oh yeah.
you're talking about coming into, graduating high school and college and everything during the 1990s when things were really challenging. We didn't have the craft beer market we have now, and
Yeah.
hops were in kind of a depressed era of the market, if you will, kind of one of the troughs.
Hmm.
And so, I think in a lot of ways, I was very fortunate that um, not I my father and his partners, particularly Tom Carpenter and Mike Smith, they had the
Right.
foresight to start what we now know as Yakima Chief
Hmm.
Hops, and they were working with Chuck at the time on breeding. It was Chuck's idea to say, he said, hey, there's a lot that could be gained through through genetics, and there's an advantage that can be gained in terms of developing varieties that yielded better, brought down the cost per unit, and so on. So there was a clear advantage. We weren't necessarily thinking in terms of all the flavors and aromatics that we think of
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
There's a different time in the market, but definitely there was an opportunity there for genetic gain. And so Chuck convinced him of that and started working with them directly. And I was in high school at the time, and just this is a kind of a summer job.
Hmm.
Kind of tasked me with helping Chuck out in the plot. So the plot was here on our family farm. So I got really
Right.
lucky in that regard that we chose this place to do that, because it just by default put me out there. And so
Hmm.
I was able to go out and help him plant and weed and do a lot of the grunt work, but
Right.
also it gave me exposure to Chuck and this wealth of knowledge and this wealth of history he had in breeding. And he kind of took me under his wing, so to speak, and walked me through his selection processes,
Hmm.
and kind of taught me what he was looking for, a little bit of his art when it comes to the breeding. And so that was really fortunate. Plus, I also he let me tag along with him. In fact, my dad asked him if I could tag along on his. I think it was well, every week or two. I think during the
Hmm.
summer, I would actually ride along with him, and he was a consultant for a lot of growers around the valley. Would help
Oh,
them out.
okay.
He helped them out with crop problems and so on. And so he would let me ride along with him, and I would just sit and listen to him talking to other growers. So it gave me this exposure to these uh, his knowledge in terms of problem solving for the crop as well. So it was like this really great educational process that I went through as a high school student. My intention, of
Hmm.
course, was to farm. It was
Right.
never at that time. I wasn't thinking, yeah, I'm going to be a full time hop breeder. But when I did come back to the farm in 1997, when I graduated from university, the hop market was a really difficult place. I mean, the farms were struggling,
Right.
and a lot of our neighbors were going out of business, and we were already pretty well set, in terms of management on the farm.
Hmm.
Um, and so really, while, um, of course, my family was, my mom and my dad were excited to have me back on the farm. We were all excited about it. It also coincided with the time that Chuck was looking at eyeing retirement and wanting to back away a little bit. And so he approached me
Hmm.
with this idea of me taking over and helping out more on the breeding side. And given the pressures on the market and the fact that the farm was already uh, sitting pretty well on from the management standpoint, I started just doing some soul searching and deciding, okay, where can I have probably the most impact or more immediate impact without burdening an already stressed situation in terms of the financial situation for the farm. And so it just made sense, to start on the
Hmm.
down a breeding path. So while it wasn't necessarily my first choice, I definitely saw a path towards a purposeful career, or at least a contribution and taking over that breeding side of things. And so I just went for it. And that's when I went back to university, got to graduate school, and that's where I landed. Ended up taking over the program full time. So yeah, that's a long explanation of how I got there, but that's how I ended up in the breeding program.
That's cool. It's kind of like it's just gradually, growing on you little by little, and you've been working alongside one of the greatest men, in all this I think hop growing industry too. So That's pretty cool. And later on down this session, we will touch more about Chuck and how his work has actually create a huge impact to the industry. So we're gonna save his some of his stories to that part too.
Great.
Okay. Let's dig into the fascinating world of hop breeding. Okay, so, for the hop breeding stuff, Jason, to me personally, I believe that every creation of new things, there must be some sort of input or initiation that kind of sparks and drive the invention wheel forward. So for our case, how do hop breeders, come up with the concepts or specifications for breeding a new hop variety?
Well, that's kind of the $1 million question, right? Because you don't know. It's a decade-long process from the time you make a cross, you select the parents to make a cross, and the time you actually
Mhm.
select or have something ready to commercialize. And so none of us have a crystal ball that's so accurate to predict what demand will look like in 10 years. Now, that's looking at it from the perspective of today.
Right.
Particularly on the aromatic side, no, it's really difficult to predict what flavors and aromas might be in demand for craft beer in a few years.
Hmm.
Now, with that said, when we first started, what we were really concerned with was breeding for alpha,
Hmm.
higher alpha varieties for more efficiency, and
Right.
that's much more, uh, you know, that's less subjective and more objective in terms of saying, okay, yeah, we just want more efficiency.
Hmm.
So, as a breeding program, we really set our stage well because we were, by being more focused on alpha, and kind of a little bit of an ironic twist, we set ourselves up better for the aroma breeding that we appreciate today.
Hmm.
Because back then in the 90s when I was getting into it, aroma breeding consisted of looking for noble type aromas, more of your
Hmm.
classic, noble hops, and then
Right.
alpha hops. The noble types, that was a difficult one to match perfectly. Still is today. It's still a challenge. It's difficult to match it perfect. It's a very fine aroma, and the brewers that are relying on it, they're using them in smaller, for the most part, smaller volumes, and so
Right.
these very large breweries are very reluctant to um, use a new hop, particularly in that noble space, because it usually meant that they were going to be making some flavor adjustment. And so that
Right.
was a very difficult sell to say, okay, yeah, use this new hop.
Hmm.
The alpha side of it, that's a much different deal. It's really all about percentage alpha and yield in pounds per acre to give you an alpha, your alpha yield per acre.
Right.
And and I say it was an ironic twist because in breeding for that, we put aroma as kind of a secondary. This is the early days of the program. It was a secondary objective, and
Hmm.
so we were selecting things that were higher in
Hmm.
alpha, and in a lot of cases, by correlation, higher in their oil content, and so on. And so it really it skewed our germplasm towards that type of selection.
Right.
The other
Right.
important piece to that is I, as a young breeder, actually got really excited when I would smell, these
Hmm.
really wonky off aromas. If you smell something that smelled like, super tropical, like juicy fruit gum, and to me, that was
Hmm.
really exciting. At the time, I knew that nobody would use it because
Hmm.
it's too
It's
too
just
impactful.
off-putting, right? Yeah.
Yeah, as far as what was in demand at the time, there's no way anybody would use that, but
Hmm.
it was still exciting, right? It was still like something new and different. It's like, wow, this is pretty cool. So the by keeping all that germplasm, it really kind of it shifted our breeding program in a favorable way towards
Hmm.
being set up well for
Hmm.
breeding for craft beer. And so, to answer your original question of how we set those objectives, you're going to set them around some you know, objective goal. It's usually going to start with the agronomics. You're going to say yield. Yield is
Hmm.
obviously very critical. Disease resistance, whether it be powdery mildew or downy mildew, and finding stable sources of resistance to disease. It's got to be grower friendly. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. You're going to look at your picking windows. When does it mature? Does it fit well within current picking windows, given the variety mixes we're growing? Does it process well and store well? These are all these factors leading up that if you think of, I always, give the analogy of hops as a complete chain of supply chain from the grower all the way to the brewer. You're looking as a breeder to be the front end of that supply chain and select hops that are going to have a positive impact all along those ways. So you're looking for ways you can add value at every step of that process. It's not just, are we creating value for the grower, or are we creating value for the brewer? It's really, are we creating value along every, along that entire chain, all the way to that beer drinker at the very end? Are you creating a quality or a value adding experience for them when they're drinking that pint of beer? Is it, whether it be through flavor and aroma, good quality bitterness, or even the price of the pint? Those are all these factors play into it. And so that's what you're going to do when you're setting those objectives. In picking aromatics, we can certainly say, yeah, we're going to breed for, specific aromatics. But in a lot of ways and this is more philosophical and part of my own art, but as a breeder, I don't tend to pigeonhole myself by saying I'm going to select these parents because I like the aromatics of those parents. You're talking about thousands of compounds driving aromatics, and they're all complex traits. The second you make that cross, you're basically, it's like playing dice, with millions of dice. You're rolling that out. You're changing the mix up. And so even if you say you want an exact Cascade type, the great irony of that is, by using Cascade, there's in no way, shape, or form are you guaranteeing that you're going to have a bunch of progeny that smell like Cascade. In fact, you usually don't.
Right.
And so it really comes down to the power of selection, how good you are, and how good your program is at selecting hops that really determine your success. And so that's, so yeah, we set objectives. We know that we're going to be searching for aromatics. We know we're going to be searching for alpha. But we have all these other factors that determine the value adding aspect of that variety that have to check. It has to check all those boxes. And so that's what we breed for.
Gotcha. And probably this is like a side question, but how much influence does the consumer or brewer feedback play into this, the whole objective things?
It's absolutely critical. Particularly, on the aromatic side, of course, we base everything that all the selection in the later stages of the program on that brewer feedback, and making sure that, when we're releasing something, there's a palpable, we could feel that pull into the market, rather than, and that starts with the initial, tests we do with these brewers that we have great relationships with, that can get them into the brew house, test them, not just smell them, but actually test them in the beer, give us good solid feedback to say, yeah, there's something here, or there's not. Otherwise, we're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. So it's that brewer feedback is really critical, particularly towards the end of the process, to confirm what the direction we're heading. But even on the alpha side, brewer acceptance and feedback is critical. You could look at the largest multinational brewer, and without positive feedback from them, without their acceptance and their qualification, a variety is not going to go anywhere. Just because we say something's great doesn't mean that doesn't mean anything. We might have checked all of our boxes, but the brewer has to go through and qualify that and ultimately accept it as well. So their feedback is paramount to the whole process.
Gotcha. It's kind of like a mutual effort. Therein, it's more like the acknowledgement and kind of acceptance of how they're going to actually use it in the brew house and actually sell the beers to customers.
Yeah, and then also helping provide the direction, in terms of selection, and saying, okay, if we, by getting that feedback and by having that constant communication, we kind of know, that's the litmus test to know that the direction we're heading in is the right direction in terms of selection. Because hops are, complex enough that we can make a set of crosses, and even though a cross wasn't made for a specific objective, say I make a cross for alpha, we might have a whole bunch of interesting aromatics that come out of that. And then we could utilize our brewer network to give us the feedback to say, yeah, this is the most interesting direction that we're seeing. and we can select from that. So even though the cross may not have been originally intended for that, it can certainly end up that way. And that brewer feedback is how we're going to know that.
Right. It kind of help, shift the gear of how the hop will perform and how you will focus more on the direction that they are
Yeah.
going. All right.
At the end of the day, that's the crystal ball I was referring to, right? That's the best thing. The closest thing we have to a crystal ball is our friends in the brewing community to tell us, yes, this is interesting and this is not, or reading consumer trends, knowing what their customers like, what the beer drinker wants. We're going to get that information from them. And so those relationships are absolutely critical.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay. All right. I mean, now the drawing board is kind of filled with the specifications and requirements, and it is the right time that we will learn the actual action, how you guys practice the breeding in the field. So, Jason, can you help walk us through the overall process of how breeding from greenhouse to the field? I'll pull one photo up, and probably we're gonna ride along with that.
Yeah. So I think the slide you have here, sums it up pretty well. We start that first year selecting our parents, and that's going to be based upon those things I talked about before. What are we trying to select? Are we we're going to be looking for yield, disease resistance, good storage stability, good processing ability, so on. And obviously, ultimately, it doesn't make a good beer. So we're going to select our parents based upon that. Make that cross, and that next year we then get the seeds resulting from that. It's an important note here that hops are dioecious, so there's separate male and female plants, and it's only the females that we harvest commercially. And so the males they really don't have any commercial value at all. They don't have enough of the looping glands or the resins to be commercially viable. And in fact, in the field, if they're present, they create seed, which is looked at upon as a negative. So we have to keep the males isolated. But anyways, we select those, we make the crosses, and we get our seeds. So in year 2, we're putting those into what we consider early selection. We may greenhouse screen them. We will put them in the field after germination and go through a round of it depends on the program, but in the case of our big chunk of our program, it's negative selection. In other words, we're culling out all the negative plants, so we're looking at disease, cone type, things like that, things we don't like, and we'll get rid of them as quickly as possible. So the idea being you start with really high population sizes. You can think of it as a funnel, really high population sizes at the start, and then you cull it down as quickly as possible. So you want them to fail fast. And so we made that first year, in year 1, between germination rates, greenhouse screening, and the field screening. Hopefully, we're able to eliminate 80 to 90% of that population and get it down to a more manageable number. That then in year 3 goes into what we call the single hill plots, and that's just a single plant. And we'll grow it there since it's hops require a lot of space. Rather than replicating by plant, we replicate by year. So we'll look at them for 3 years, and then after 3 years of evaluating, we'll make a round of selection. And so that process involves, over the course of that 3 years, walking that plot, looking at all the plants and identifying the ones of interest, harvesting those, getting a relative comparison in yield, looking at the analytics, disease resistance, and so on. And then maybe some loose sensory. We don't have we don't necessarily go do the deep dive on sensory at that point, and there's really not enough volume to do much in terms of brewing, but we can get a pretty decent idea of, okay, does it first check the agronomic box? Is this a good farming friendly hop? Will it provide the economics needed to make it viable? If it checks that box, then and it has some other items of interest, whether it be aromatics, high alpha, whatever that may be, we then go into what we call the advanced plots, and where we will take typically rhizome cuttings off of those and expand it into additional replicated plots in multiple hills, a hill being just a plant. And again, looking for 3 years, and kind of the same process, except at this point, since we have multiple hills, we have a little bit more volume to work with. And so we're able to then, usually that's where we'll run them through a very intensive sensory process, both in the the raw hop rub, as well as into some brewing trials, particularly dry hop trials, just to see from the aromatic standpoint how they may contribute to the beer. And so after we collect all that data, after 3 years, we'll make another round of selection, and then we go into what we'd call the elite trial, the elite stage. There's a couple different paths we can take here. If it's something we're really excited about, we might move it into a commercial size trial. Or if it's something that we just want more time to look at, we'll go into a smaller scale trial, but still under expanded hills to give us more volume to look at in additional locations, to give it more replicates and assess its it's how well it adapts to different environments. And again, it's really just all about looking at it and getting a really robust team put together to look at the how it performs in the field, how it does sensory wise, how it does in the beers, and then at the end of that, making a round of selection to say, okay, yeah, we're excited about this. This is also a stage at which we can get some brewer feedback. We don't have a lot of volume, but we have enough that we could start sending out some small to some of our brewers that we've had a relationship with a long time on testing these things. We'll send them out some samples to get their feedback. And if it makes it past that stage, then typically we're pretty excited about it, and we're looking to commercialize it. And then we'll put it into a more intensive review process with brewers to make sure that to confirm what we're seeing. We'll get it planted in hopefully more locations to again test its adaptability on a commercial scale. And then after in a perfect world, after 3 years, we would say, yes, this is something that we can apply a name to and brand it and get it out in the market. Rarely ever works out that way to where it's perfect, 10-year process.
Right.
Be much longer than that.
So we are looking at least 10 years process from the cross to the commercialized. And like what you mentioned, this is like kind of a gambling with the future with a huge bet, right? Because you're just breeding 10 years ago in the past and expecting the outcomes to kind of shine in 10 years plus later. So it's pretty, I think, an amazing process to work with too.
Yeah,
so
definitely teaches you patience.
Yeah, for real. So, in terms of population wise, after you cross, how much? I mean, what's the number that you typically see?
It varies. Of course, breeding is a numbers game. At the end of the day, you think about all these complex traits that you're trying to select for. Whether it be yield, aromatics, often durable disease resistance. These are all multi-gene traits. It's not just single gene traits that you look at and you say, okay, let's make a cross and we've got 25% chance of finding this. It's not like that. You combine all that together and the odds of success are incredibly low. So when you combine all those traits and try to put it into one package, so it's really all about the numbers. So it varies by year and by program, whether you're talking about ours or others. But I think typically for us, we're going to be looking at minimum of 10,000 and as many as 40,000 seedlings in a given year, and each one of those seedlings is a genotype, is an individual genotype, and so it has the potential to be the next big variety. So it's really beyond that. It's about your selection process then, and the power of selection, and your ability to find the winners out of that. But it is really about if you can imagine whatever it is you're breeding for, your odds are going to fall on a bell curve. And
right.
5%,
5%. Yeah,
your success is going to be at the very end of that long tail. And so, if you're only if you're crossing and you only got 20 or 30 plants, your odds of success are pretty low. So we tend to work through numbers. Now, increasingly, we've got newer technologies coming in that are allowing us to select on a molecular level that will help us improve our success or our path to success, and efficiencies in getting there. But it's still not a substitute for the need for numbers by any means.
Right. Got you. So I would like to step back a little bit and focus on the crossing part. Can you touch on, the, how can I say this, about the way or the method of pollinations, some of them that you guys are using.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's fairly straightforward in hops because you do have your separate male and female. So you have your males that you can collect pollen from.
Hmm.
There's no real secret to that. It's literally just cutting the flowers. They're very prolific in terms of pollen production, and so you can collect the pollen from those.
Hmm.
And just like in most, and then of course the females are very prolific in terms of the flowers, and they're when the hop plant blooms, for lack of a better way of putting it, that it forms this little cluster of flowers. Basically, it looks like a pom pom,
Hmm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
the stigmatic material that comes out, and that's the optimum time to pollinate. And so what we'll do is we'll bag the plants prior to those flowers really opening up,
Hmm.
and so we don't, we're hopefully excluding any pollen that we don't want to get in there
Mm.
from pollinating those flowers. So we bag the plants, and then as soon as we're ready, we'll blow pollen in and or brush it on, and then put the bag back on to make sure that we're excluding whatever external pollen coming in. And then once those flowers are past receptiveness, we take the bags off, let the cones mature as they normally would, and then in September ish, depending on the plant, we will collect the cones and then thresh the seeds out of those. And
Hmm.
so that's really the process. There's other alternative methods. You can allow open pollination, which typically where you'd allow males to pollen to wind blow and pollinate the females and collect seed that way as well. It's a little bit more difficult to be specific in your crosses, but it can be effective.
Gotcha. Because I mean, for the research of this session, I was kind of curious. The probably I would say the preferred method for the hub breeders. When we talk about open versus cross pollination, I'm not sure which one is the one that you guys prefer, but I think to me personally, the cross one, the intentional one, is much more predictable. Maybe
Yeah, well, definitely. When you know that and you
the
understand the
parents,
genetic
right?
background of your
Hmm.
parents, you're going to have more predictability for sure.
Hmm.
Um, with that said, there is some advantage to allowing open pollination and selecting from a mass selection standpoint uh, from a cross like that, because you can get high numbers very easily,
Hmm.
and you could be fairly targeted still. You don't, if you for example, plant the female in the vicinity of selected males, so which males are going to be pollinating. That's I think been a common methodology in breeding programs for years and years, for
Hmm.
past 100 years.
Hmm.
So it's an effective method. But certainly, if you're wanting predictability, or if you're wanting to do, like, for example, a top cross or a test cross, certainly you're going to have to go with a more specific cross. And you can do that on with the big bags and pollinate a lot of flowers and get a lot of seed, or you
Hmm.
can use something as small as a bread bag is a common way of doing that, where you'll bag just a sidearm and
Hmm.
get a seed that way as well. So yeah, that's typically, I think you're spot on. If you're looking for predictability, or you have a reason to be very specific, then you're going to do it in a much more specific way. So.
Gotcha. And it is very interesting and exciting to hear. You mentioned that there are more technologies that gonna, and that's not gonna. It has been involved in the breeding process for the like DNA sequence markers and all those molecular level. So I'm really looking forward how the future of the hop breeding and the hop as a plant will be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's an exciting time. I
Mhm.
think well, for me, that somebody that's been doing it for a while now, I'm very excited about the way hops are being used now. I think,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's incredibly exciting, because when I first started my career, the stuff we're excited about now would have been probably thrown away and discarded, and, said that'll never work because of the strong aromatics, and
Mhm.
nobody wanted, like what we call dank now, or tropical. Those were not flavors and aromas that were wanted. So But now we have a better understanding of those contributions, but we also understand them, from a technical standpoint. For example, their interaction with yeast and how that can accentuate and bring out more additional complex flavors.
Mm-hmm.
We have an understanding of that, and then when you tie that then to the ability to select on a molecular level, for that and those and other traits, we're really kind of entering into an exciting time, because here you have this complex plant. And I've said it before, and I think I mean it more now than I did even when I started saying it 10 years ago, that we're just scratching the surface on the potential for hops in terms of
Right.
what kind of exciting aromas and flavors we can get out of them. It
Mm-hmm.
also raises the bar, it makes it more
Right.
difficult, because you can't, a few years ago, given the place and time we were in, uh, the expansion of IPA a few years ago, I was just say, it was relatively easy to get a new variety out in the market and get it commercialized and say, yeah, this is something exciting. That's
Mm-hmm.
not the case now. There's a lot more
Right.
competition, and there's a lot more expectation around what that contribution is going to be. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's more difficult, but in my mind, that's exciting. And you're still talking about a plant that, as we evolve our understanding of not just its contribution in beer and how to really leverage that towards new flavors and aromas, but also our understanding of what's driving that on a genetic level will allow
Mm-hmm.
us to kind to really take full advantage of the horsepower that is in that
Mm-hmm.
in terms of our ability to create variability and select for it and create new and interesting flavors and combinations. So it's a fun time. It's a fun time for
Mm-hmm.
sure. So
It's very good. That's very good. I think a year ago I got a chance to talk with Dr. Ron Beeston from NZ
mhm.
Hops, and it was kind of amazing to hear. He mentioned that there was a certain point in time, probably like the beginning of 2000s, that the breeding program there kind of a shift their focus from the alpha to the unique characteristic, and this is probably like a not coincidence, but it also happens with your site as well, and that kind of probably be, I think, one of the key factors for the game changer in the hop breeding, that we start seeing more and more of the unique hop cultivars being bred and being used in the brewing industry.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. It's
Yeah,
pretty
no,
cool.
absolutely. I think when you look at NZ Hops and Ron and his approach, I think it's we're similar in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
In that regard, in terms of how our programs have evolved and our ability to select for unique aromatics. It's I think that's why you see the way things have evolved the way they have in terms of
Yeah.
how those hops getting to market. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. All right, cool. Jason, before we hit the last section of this session, I would like to take this opportunity to talk with you about the late and great Chuck Zimmerman. Since you spent some wonderful time working with him, so can you tell us, like what he was like, and also if you can share, a bit of stories of some of the hops that he touched, like
Mhm.
YCR5 or 14, and that would be very grateful.
Yeah, I think that, the best way to describe Chuck was a teacher.
Hmm.
He not just for myself, but for really the way he approached his interactions. That maybe it was a product of when I got to know him. I got to know him later and a little bit later in his career, but I look at the interactions he had with myself and with with my father and others. He was just always teaching, and you could tell he just had a real love for plants, and his interest was in furthering the hop plant to the benefit
Hmm.
of the industry, and utilizing genetics to do that. And so yeah, and you could look at you got the timeline there. He had a touch on all these great varieties, starting with Cascade. While he may not have made the initial cross, he was
Hmm.
really instrumental in bringing Cascade, particularly up to Washington, the state of Washington, and getting it out there to growers and exposing it to the industry. And so you can make a very strong argument that Cascade would have never been successful had it not been for Chuck's efforts in getting that commercialized. And his first crossing, he was involved in Comet, Chinook, CFG 90, which is Centennial, Columbus, and then of course all the YCR varieties, Altanum, Warrior, Simcoe, Palisade. These are all, you can draw a straight line back from them to Chuck and his philosophy and his breeding. And he was a teacher, and he was a true artist as well, and of course a great scientist. But I think he was the first one that really drove it home to me that it sounds almost like a cliche to say it because it gets tossed around a lot, but this whole concept of breeding is equal parts art and science, and there's so much truth to that. It took me a lot of years to really understand that and what he meant by that. But yeah, Chuck was a real artist, and he had a knack for understanding value creation and what would truly be valuable in the industry. And so that's why you see, I think, so many successes with his name attached to it. So yeah, it was I can't overstate the how big of an opportunity that was for me to have learned from him in my early years.
That's great. I mean, looking at the timeline and all the hops that he involved, and if we kind of put the knowledge that you share about the length of time that the breeder had to spend in the breeding process, we can subtract like 10 or 20 years from the releasing date, or maybe even longer for those old hop varieties. And it is kind of mind-blowing to me to think about say 1990s. He touched Centennial, and it's probably going to be bred like 1970 or something. And think about that time, how the brewing industry was in comparison to the 1990s. I think it's probably some of the hop cultivars are too early for that time. I believe so.
Absolutely. Right. I think you look at Centennial ended up finding a place, but certainly Comet and Chinook, they really didn't take off because they were kind of put into that alpha space, and they're being released at the same time, competing for acres against Nugget and Galena, and then eventually Columbus or CTZ. So it definitely they're in the wrong place in time, and that's often why varieties take that long, because we always talk about this 10-year process, 10 years of development, but you're right, you're spot on that oftentimes it's a much longer process to find commercial success. I mean, I always joke that Cascade's kind of like a cat, it's had no less than 9 lives in our industry, because the cross was made in 1956. And it saw initial plant out commercially in the early 70s, and saw some initial success early 70s, and then kind of dropped off mid 70s, saw some more success in the late 70s, early 80s, and then dropped off again. So you see this, this continual change until it kind of stabilized, particularly around craft beer. And a lot of these other varieties are the same way, and Simcoe is a good example of one that, the cross was made late 80s, and we didn't release it until 2000. We didn't see any real success with it until around 2010 is when it really started to ramp up. And so it's a long process. And it's funny because we're celebrating this year the 25th year of Simcoe. And this is something that Chuck and I worked with. When we were working on that in the late 90s, it was really selected around its alpha percentage combined with that low cohumulum. You had Chuck was working on these different varieties, and he was looking at all these different paths to market. And so if you look at it from the standpoint of the varieties we were looking at that time, we had Autanum, which was very noble-like, or if you were short on Cascade, it was Cascade-like, just kind of that kind of aromatic realm.
Right.
We had Simcoe, which was high alpha, low cohumulum. The intention there was targeting those brewers, particularly at the time, Anheuser-Busch, that were really keen on the research at the time that was showing that low cohumulum contributed a less harsh bitterness. So it was a smoother bitterness. And so it was really that high alpha wrapped up with that low cohumulum below 20. There really wasn't anything else on the market at the time other than Horizon, which is an old variety, Horizon really didn't yield well. And so
Right.
Simcoe presented a better value proposition because of its a better yield. And then we also, at the time, Chuck identified this variety that at the time we were calling Satis. It was YCR number 7. It's kind of back way. That one was very much chemically was spot on for Galena. And so it was really to appeal to these major brewers. At that time, it was Miller that was very interested in a Galena type that was high alpha, high beta, higher cumulone. But it was spot on chemically for Galena and had a little bit of a yield advantage. And so we had one down in that path. And then, of course, there was Warrior. That was just your overall high alpha, 17 plus alpha, 16 to 18% alpha, and decent yield. So anyways, we were trying to hit, and that was really more to play in the nugget space, more of that kind of just more generic alpha. And so we were trying to hit on all those aspects of the market. And so that was really, driven by Chuck's vision for value adding and finding answers and solutions for the brewers of the time. So yeah, it was an exciting time. Of course, you look back and as far as our program goes, our breeding program, each one of those varieties, and I got a lump Palisade in there as well. That's a little bit of a different story, but each one of those varieties played a little bit of a role in a different way of keeping the doors open back in the time when we had zero revenue breeding program. And so they found success in different ways, and they would peak and then drop off, peak and then drop off. And that's really what kept us going, was these limited successes with these brands early on, pre-craft beer. So it was an interesting time.
Right. That was a really different time, different landscape, and pretty challenging to present those unique hop at that time as well.
Now it was, what was for me as a young person coming in, and these varieties were already in the advanced stages of the program. It gave me a first look of thinking, well, this must be pretty easy. We've got
okay, yeah,
ready to go, but it was a real quick learning that no, this isn't easy, and the path to market is the challenge. And I think that was one of the enduring lessons I learned from Chuck as well, is just how important those relationships were in that next process. And so the breeding was one thing, but getting them to market was absolutely critical. And so watching Chuck and the way he managed those relationships with brewers at the time, and getting those hops out to brewers and managing expectations around those things, it was a real important learning time for me. Without that, absent of that, I can't imagine a young breeder coming into the market and just without any experience,
right.
not driving home the importance of those relationships and how to approach that, how to get them out into the market. And so that was pretty critical, and Chuck was really good at that.
Hey man, thanks for sharing this wonderful stories. It's very cool to hear about it. Okay, all right, so we are moving forward to the last section of this session, the fun one, I guess. So me myself personally, we know that before the potential experimental hops officially advance their ways to the public, they are entitled to the code name like HBC 369 that eventually became Mosaic, or the most recent one, the HBC 586, that are now known as Crush, right, for hop breeding company. So Jason, my question is, how do you guys come up with their official name? Like, are there like committees, or how do they how do you guys come up with a name?
No, it's a difficult process. It's interesting because hop breeding company is a joint venture between ourselves and Haas, right. And we're I think it's very easy for us to get on the same page in terms of which varieties have value and which deserve to be commercially viable. What's more difficult is finding an identity for those varieties that matches the cultures of both companies, because they're both the Yakima Chief supply chain and the John I. Haas supply chain, great companies, great supply chains, but they're different. There's just differences there. And so we have to bring all these personalities and these cultures together to find a name that resonates with everybody. And that's challenging, particularly in a time when, you know, the brewers themselves are so creative, and we got, you know, how many thousands of craft brewers across the globe, and they're all creative people. And so they're naming their beers, and we try to avoid a name that appears in beer.
Right.
You know,
Right.
but you know, we trademark, so there's complications there, but B also, you know, if somebody's already got kind of a you know, either a trademark or kind of ownership of a given word or mark or name, it's not really fair to the other brewers if we name it that as well, and then they go to use it, but they can't because this other brewers. So it gets, you know, anyways, it gets complicated. So anyways, you combine that, and all of a sudden this process becomes very complicated. So we've gone through a lot of different processes in the past, but now we've got it kind of, you know, it is a decision by committee now, you know, where we've got, you know, representatives from each organization, including myself and Michael Ferguson as a breeder with Haas. We kind of sit down and start mapping out our ideas and seeing what kind of things stick, and then each representatives from each organization get to weigh in, and then we come up with the final decision on what that's going to be after, you know, a lot of legal wrangling and reviews and everything else. So it's not an easy process. In fact, I would say, you know, it's harder than naming your children, because you have to get input from so many people and approval. So, but it, you know, on one hand, it's a fun process, but it's also equally frustrating because you just gotta, you know, you got to bring all the minds together. But we enjoy it. Anytime we make that decision, say, yeah, we're going to name it, I think we all get a little bit excited and try and figure out what that's going to look like. So, but yeah, not an easy process by any means.
I can feel that. So this naming process, where does it fit in, you know, the whole breeding timeline? When you guys will enter the naming process?
Yeah, so we'll go through, you know, we'll get it through to the elite stage, and there's kind of an intermediate stage between elite and commercial for us that we call it concept. And this is really where we're doing our true market testing. And if something goes into that kind of concept stage where we treat it basically like a commercial line without a name, if we start to really feel that there's a commercial value there, or there's a commercial pull into the market, that's when we'll decide as a group that as hop breeding companies say, yeah, this one deserves a name. This one, we need to commercialize this fully. So that's when we go into full commercialization. So it's really not until then, you know, we don't apply names to them until we're 100% confident that we want to put it out there as a fully commercial variety. So it's definitely late in the process. I would say at a minimum, it's typically year 12 or something. In fact, the only variety I could think of over the course of my career, or well, you know, and historically even, that has, you know, been given a name after basically year 10 of breeding was probably Mosaic.
Oh,
and,
okay.
And that, it's a great variety. Don't get me wrong, but it's also, you know, there was a bit of luck involved there because of when it came about. You know, it came about at a time when IPA was just going through the roof. You know, varieties like Amarillo, Simcoe, Citra, they had already kind of paved the way. And so Mosaic hit during a time that it was really perfect. You know, you just
spot on, right?
It up there. It's got that great, you know, complex, tropical, aromatic. And so it just hit, boom, it took off. That's really the only variety, and that's really more of a question of timing. The rest of them, it all took, you know, forever. And so I think for most varieties, you're really waiting around to see, do you have that commercial pull? And that's going to be usually, you know, I would say from the time you made a cross, it's usually around 15 years, you know, before you're seeing a name on a lot of these varieties. So yeah, definitely, you know, luckily we have a full pipeline, so we've always got things to select from, but but it certainly takes some time. It's not overnight.
Understood. You know, like it is pretty interesting to think about the hop. I mean, the name of the hop from the earlier days. That's probably tied into the regions or the hills that they have been grown, like Cascade or Willamette valleys and all those kind of, you know, places. And now you have to be more creative to actually showcase the identity or the entity of the hop itself, like
Mhm.
Sabro or Talus or Crush. So I like what I said earlier. I think it is very kind of challenging nowadays to come up with the really good name for anything.
No, I absolutely agree. And we
Mhm,
typically anymore we would prefer a name, speaks more to the hop, and
mhm,
it's not for us. It's not as much about the region as it is the hop itself, because there's so many, and you're alluding to this. There's so many different uses now, and the utility of hops has changed. Whereas years ago, you go back 30 years, releasing an aroma hop from Yakima, that's basically what you were doing. If it was an aroma hop from Yakima. So you look
mhm,
out your
mhm,
window or your door and say, what defines this area? It's those mountains right there. Let's pick that. That's what's going to identify this hop as an aroma hop from this valley.
mhm,
Whether it's the Willamette Valley or whether it's, the Cascade Mountains, or whatever it might be. That's not really the case now. And now we want the hop to speak for itself. And so you want a
mhm,
name that might, you know, be a nod towards the aromatic contribution, or have some sort of imagery around that, or have some sort
mhm.
of whimsical feeling about it that kind of really points to the use of that hop, which is much different than it was back then. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, got you. Okay, Jason, here we are at the finish line. So to close this session, I would like you to kind of share us your vision. You're like from your point of view. What does the future of hop breeding that you hope for look like?
mm, well, that's a good question. I think for me, I think the future really revolves around our ability to truly create and add value. And that value really could take many different forms. I think, for us, and I think for a lot of programs right now, there's a focus around these ideas of sustainability and reducing
Mhm,
inputs per pound of hops produced. If you yield, of course, is always important, always has been when it comes to breeding. But I think nowadays it's become more critical that we become more focused on producing hops that can be grown um, with fewer inputs at a lower cost, because of the pressures we have both economically and environmentally on hop production. And so that's really, I think, a number one focus. But then providing that, or combining that with really truly novel and useful aromatic uh, uh, characteristics, or alpha, whatever it may be. So I think that's really the future. We'll continue to expand on our ability to create novelty, to create
mhm,
utility with the hop plant in terms of its brewing applications, but combine that with next level sustainability in terms of its productivity. I think that's really the next step, because you really have an opportunity, right, to create uh, a value across the supply chain, where you can uh, you could make an argument that the that productivity could result in maintaining returns to growers that give them an economically viable situation, but then also manages the costs at the brewer levels
mhm,
in terms of their hop bill, while meanwhile increasing the overall impact of the hops on the environment and their production. So that helps helps the community at large. So
mhm,
I really think that's where the future lies, and then it's going to be employing all of our, all the next gen technologies in terms of molecular selection and so on, to really bring that to bear and help us
mhm,
get there. So, and then the first we're already on the path down that for us personally, I know there's a lot of, there's a good proliferation of new varieties out there, but if you look at things like HBC 522 and a couple others we have out there that are,
mhm,
that we've tipped over that next ceiling of yield in terms of productivity, but still maintaining some great aromatics and utility in the brew for brewers. I
mhm.
think we're starting down that path. So
Got you. I really love the concept of creating value across the supply chain. It just resonate, all the good deeds and intention that you care in every process or every part of this, the utilization of hops from from the breeding part, the growing part, the supplying part, and the consuming part. So I think it's very nice to hear that.
Yeah, no, so it's important to me. I could get on a soapbox here, but there's no reason for us to be operating in a zero-sum situation, right? I mean, there's an opportunity. There's always an opportunity out there to create value across that entire supply chain that gets equitably distributed, and I think that's pretty important to really capitalize on that opportunity. If we don't, then shame on us. But
gotcha, excellent. And this is where we end the session. So, Jason, thank you so much for taking us through this fascinating world of hop breeding journey. I know that you mentioned at the beginning this is a super busy period of your team and all the grower and farmers out there. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. It was great chatting with you.
All right, cool. Okay, so I have to just send you back to your day now, and hopefully I can have a chance to meet you in person somehow in the
near future. Be great. Look forward to it.
Okay. In the meantime, take care.
Right. Bye. You too. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Here you have it. The journey of creating new hop cultivars. The activity doesn't happen overnight, like what Jason mentioned. In fact, it takes like a decade, but that decade is just for the development of new cultivar. But from this session, you will also learn that it's not just about releasing the new hot kit to the street or to the playground. It takes time before they get attraction, or they caught some eyes of the brewers and consumers. So, it's like you are playing a huge, gambling with tons of bet with the future. And for me, I would say that the next time that you are enjoying beers, maybe those in the hoppy camps, if you have, a glimpse of, what's happening behind this curtain of the breeding of the new hops, as well as the efforts that the breeders and the farmer has gone through, then that might enhance the appreciation that you have for both hops and beer. That's my hope. So that's all for today. The Good Burp session will be back in no time. So stay tuned. Until next time, cheers and sawadee krap.